Hey everyone, we've got news from NIO today, and in this video I'll try to explain what the news means and also try to answer some of your questions. Actually, we had a couple of questions around this news today in our all members chat in the Patreon community, so I'll flick through some of the comments here and then also give you my personal views on that. So the news is that NIO has announced a strategic equity investment from CYVN Holdings. This helps NIO to raise $1.1 billion, but according to my reading, this also means that NIO is diluting shareholders. So that means if you're owning NIO stock, or if you're an employee and you may receive employee stock options, or if you're Libin, maybe if you're watching, then today your worth and equity stake in NIO has become less. That's because NIO has actually, with this agreement, agreed to issue how many? I think it's 84 million newly issued shares, so Class A ordinary shares. Correct me if I'm wrong, but according to my reading, this means there will be a larger float of shares and so of total outstanding shares, and thereby this should have a dilution effect, and that's what I just mentioned with your equity becoming less worth in a company. And then there is a second part to it, which is that 40 million Class A shares have also been transferred from Tencent to this new stakeholder, equity investment stakeholder here, which is Abu Dhabi, or the Abu Dhabi government through this holding company here called CYVN Holdings. I've never heard of them before, to be honest, and I have to say I don't have too much background knowledge about Abu Dhabi and the government and how they strategically invest. I know of the investments about, for example, by Saudi Arabia into Lucid, another EV company from the US. So obviously some of these states who have in the past largely made money by extracting oil and selling it to the world, they want to shift to a more sustainable way of energy generation, and also in a future in which they still can have a stake, and thereby EVs are becoming quite interesting. So let's jump into some of these comments here. I think my first comment here also was, if I find it, that this is approximately 5% of a dilution. So actually this much is what the stock should be down. If I'm looking at the moment when I'm recording this, the stock is down 1.3% only. So that means also, given it's a particularly red market today with a setback in Chinese names, but also other interest rates sensitive stocks or growth stocks. So in this overall market, it seems like NIO is doing actually quite well despite this news. And that means reading number one is maybe the investors have kind of anticipated it. Or the reason number two is that investors think that this equity raise or this issuing of new shares and thereby getting 1.1 billion in new cash is a positive. And that might be because of the fact that, I mentioned before that NIO certainly is on some of the valuation metrics like price to sales multiples, it's priced similarly to its phase in 2019 when the company had only a couple of millions left in the bank and was short to bankruptcy, right? So it's essentially priced in a way for bankruptcy right now, because possibly investors did not trust that NIO, with the current cash position and with the current run rate and traction, would be able to reach the point of break even. So that might be the reason why this message is also positively perceived by the markets, because it kind of gives NIO a higher probability that they have enough time and enough cash in order to achieve the break even at some point in time. Then the the news release also mentions that this is a strategic investment, right? So it's not, cash is always only one part of investment, and there's also strategic aspects. Like usually if you get in a new investor, and this is a quite big investor, so they'll end up owning 7% of NIO, and they're getting quite a huge transfer from Tencent, which is also one of the most significant shareholders of NIO, to them, and so they also will receive a board seat. So this means that this is more than just a normal investment in the company, right? They could have just bought shares in the open in the market and acquired that amount of shares, but seems that they want to have influence. And well, to be frank, and that was my first comment here, is that I do not really see the strategic value of this investment in the first place currently. Maybe I don't have enough knowledge about how Abu Dhabi invests, but the question is like, what is in for NIO here other than the cash? So you could argue that, well, they have 5.5 billion left. That might be, that's a chance. You have a shot of becoming profitable with that amount of cash in a bank. So you may not actually want to raise money, or you may want to wait a little bit for raising money later on, if possibly, let's say, sales are also already on a good trajectory, and then you might be able to raise money at a higher share price and thereby causing less dilution to shareholders. But that was not the case. So the timing of this investment here is quite interesting, because seemingly it's born out of need or necessity by NIO. However, I would also say there is another case where you would say that maybe management saw with the recent very poor performance that there is also a path to bankruptcy, frankly, right? So it is maybe not 100% certain that NIO will be able to achieve break even. And what happens like if in the next couple of months NIO doesn't show the growth which they have anticipated, and then maybe the share price will tank even further. And there are certainly hedge funds betting on just that. That's why NIO is priced the way it is. And maybe they would be only able to raise money then at much lower valuation, right? So that's are a couple of thoughts around it, like in which matter, in which direction you may want to see it is up to you in the end. Also, as always, this is not financial advice, but you are welcome to join us here in this Patreon community. Just go to patreon.com/Dongxi and discuss things like that. Get informed so that you can form your own opinion on that. So, number one, it's dilutive. Number two, it's maybe not out of necessity. And number three, I didn't know what is the strategic aspect of it. So I began on speculating here on top of that, and was actually wondering if this could be a similar deal to Lucid and the Saudis, who at some point, Saudi Arabia has a big investment in Lucid. By the way, I think also recently another one in Human Horizons. Is that the real name? The company behind, the holding company behind, what's the name again? I forgot it. This really cyberpunk style car. I actually drove it in Shanghai. Sorry, I forgot about the name. Anyways, let's go back to Lucid. So if I remember the name, I will tell you again. So anyways, Lucid has an investment by Saudi Arabia, right? And then a couple of months later, or I actually don't know the exact timing, but Saudi Arabia has announced that they are going to order 100,000 vehicles from Lucid as a company. So what I'm speculating here is that, for one, we have those really high sales targets announced by NIO, by the CFO, right? He publicly came out and said 250,000. That's our target for this year, and we got some reiterations of these comments from management. And so everyone with the weak entry into this year was kind of wondering, like, how is it possible? Do they know something which we don't know? And one idea could be that Abu Dhabi is now making this investment in NIO at a very depressed share price, right? And they are, of course, helping to fund the company here. And then what if later on they announce, similar to Saudi Arabia here, a large order, maybe it's not 100,000 vehicles, but maybe something similar, of NIO cars, and thereby, of course, securing NIO future in a way that they might be able to reach some sort of sales targets, which ultimately would make the stock price go up, and then ultimately already benefit their 7% investment in NIO, right? So this is maybe kind of a trick that they could play as an investment, as an investor here. It's not unusual, I would say. It's not necessarily going to happen, but, you know, with the background of NIO promising those higher numbers, maybe they knew something, because this is certainly a privately negotiated deal, which means, you know, it's very likely that Abu Dhabi, those investors, NIO and Tencent, they sat on a table and they negotiated this deal. And so, yeah, that would be one way to think about it. What might be in strategic aspect. Another one which I mentioned here, or maybe about the role of Tencent. You know, Tencent is this large stakeholder in NIO and also needed to divest a little bit from some of their investments. Yeah, it's maybe also in their interest to bring on another strategic investor in order to help the company grow overseas and have more funding ready, and you know, maybe have some other strategic aspect of Abu Dhabi as an investor coming in here, which would be also to the benefit of Tencent. So since Tencent and NIO are very close, I think it's kind of an, you know, a relationship in which they are kind of like partners, right? So this should enable such a deal and makes it more easy. What else? Another idea I had was around the topic of it could have something to do about the topic of batteries or energy storage, right? So NIO was developing all of these, or let's say this, NIO just recently in the earnings call has reiterated their plan of building out 1,000 swap stations this year. That's a huge increase. They see it as a way of course, growing sales as well. But in the end, each of them is in itself a way of not only replenishing power for the cars, but also a battery storage, energy storage, and it can help to balance the grid. So I made videos about this, that this at some point in time could be a potential business case that with the fluctuation of the energy prices, especially in countries like or in regions, in geographies like Europe, where you have large fluctuations due to renewable energy being used a lot. This is where battery swap stations could come in, balance the grid, and trade between the arbitrages between high and low energy prices. And this might be interesting from Abu Dhabi's perspective. If you think about that, they want to divest out of oil and get into the new oil, which would be about batteries, renewables, energy storage. Certainly this is where NIO could play a role. And I was actually getting sort of the sense that I think, this huge rollout of swap stations that NIO is doing, it's kind of ridiculous to think that a little startup company and, not overly capitalized company like NIO is building out this huge infrastructure, first of all in China, but maybe also in other geographies in the future. Although, from a grid perspective, these are still small numbers, right? In how much energy you can store in some of these battery swap stations. However, the network is quite extensive, and so I'm actually wondering why we don't see any deals by NIO with, for example, the State Grid or any other major players also in overseas markets that should be interested in having a stake in such kind of a technology. So far we haven't heard of it yet, and I think NIO should really look to not trying to build all of this on their own, because of course it is a constraint, and it is an issue of cash. But maybe Abu Dhabi had some incentives to get in there and maybe would announce something or wants to have a stake in this area of the battery swap station deployment. That would be one way to think about. Of course, speculative, but just giving you something to think here. And then, yeah, one more almost conspirator kind of theory here is, you know how Abu Dhabi has a stake in Manchester City, the football club, and of course the football club is calls himself the Sky Blues, and if you look here, that's just taken from Wikipedia. The Abu Dhabi United Group for Development and Investment, so that's kind of the holding or the stakeholder in Manchester City. There are rumors around that they might be connected to the Abu Dhabi government. And as this is from that the investment in NIO is actually coming from a holding company of the Abu Dhabi government, right? So wouldn't it be in their interest with this NIO investment that this kind of goes hand in hand? I know it's maybe a little bit too far off, but it kind of strikes a little bit like seeing all of these blue jerseys here. So they're not only owning Manchester City, they're also owning the FC Mumbai, Melbourne City FC, and New York City FC. So all of these football clubs having those blue jerseys and are basically under this slogan sky blue, and everything's blue, like blue sky is coming, right? So here's the connection to NIO, and wouldn't it be a strategic benefit for NIO if in markets like the UK, in Australia, in the US, and possibly India, who knows, NIO could benefit from some sort of a sponsoring partnership, maybe NIO logos on the jerseys, maybe what's gonna happen in the Etihad Stadium, maybe a NIO day. Such types of collaborations might be possible if this in fact is kind of the strategic benefit that Abu Dhabi has promised to NIO or is bringing with them. So that would align well. It would align with the globalization efforts for NIO. NIO needs branding. NIO needs visibility. If Abu Dhabi government has a 7% stake in NIO, then they would like to see the share price go up, and they would like to see NIO selling more cars, right? So why not give them visibility? And by the way, Champions League and Manchester City is very, very prominent in China, so it also has the effect coming to reverse to China that this helps to build a brand and so on. It might be a little bit far-fetched or a little bit too speculative here, but as I mentioned before, like to me, the strategic investment angle here is unclear. And so, let me know in the comments what you think about it. Which one of this strikes to you? Is it that they might give NIO an order for cars? Is it maybe about batteries, energy storage, and so on? Is it maybe about the internationalization of brand building overseas? I don't know about Abu Dhabi as a market. It's a pretty tiny market, so I'm not thinking that just bringing NIO to Abu Dhabi wouldn't be a great deal. Maybe it's having some spillover effects that maybe the Saudis also getting interested in stuff like that. Could be, that's sort of the things that we spoke about, but still until now, people in the chat are like, why is NIO doing that? From their perspective, maybe it doesn't make too much sense, only for the money. Do they really need the money right now? And then there's another tidbit here around that Li Bin, he made a post in the NIO app in Chinese, and Ken posted it in our community, and what he outlined about the investment here is, where is it, that it took only 3 weeks from the discussions to the signing of the agreement for this cooperation, which shows Abu Dhabi's determination to invest in technology, innovation, blah, blah, blah. So this is a question for me, like who approached who? was it NIO approaching Abu Dhabi? Then that would mean that NIO wants to raise money, maybe because they think they have to pay off the R&D for sub-brands, maybe because they want to stem all of the infrastructure built out in swap stations and so on out of their own pockets. And so they said, look, let's gonna raise money now. Don't let any question marks arise around the prospects of our company possibly facing bankruptcy. We don't want that. So maybe it was from NIO's side, but it could also have been from the other side, from Abu Dhabi, and to the surprise of NIO, and then maybe some of the strategic aspects that I've just outlined, were really valued by NIO here, and then they agreed to doing that despite the fact that they thought they wouldn't necessarily raise money now, but maybe that's when Tencent comes in and they say like, look guys, if Tencent also sells some shares to Abu Dhabi, then we don't have, let's say, 7% dilution. Instead, we only have 5% dilution. So that could have been, part of the thoughts around this here, which is unclear to me, of course, which one is the correct one, but maybe you have some ideas in the comments. Certainly, it could be, from an investor perspective, also an important psychological signal. Somebody is willing to invest 1.1 billion at this point in time, where NIO is at a point where NIO is struggling. They could lose, of course, their investment. They wouldn't have to invest now. They could maybe let the company bleed and then buy them out at some other time. But of course, NIO could become target of a buyout by somebody else. So with high likelihood, this was kind of a deal which both sides, of course, kind of agreed to, because, of course, Li Bin, he's the man who's owning the most in the company, and he's getting diluted as well, and he needs to be happy with it. On the other hand, again, like with this 3 weeks of negotiation, this one last point I wanted to make is this also sounds a little bit ad hoc to me. Like, in case that NIO just came out and said like, look guys, we need to raise the money, and then they've done it in the last couple of 3 weeks, this may also signal a not well timed offering by NIO as a company, and that it's done very ad hoc, very chaotic, maybe similar to other stuff that's currently going on in the company with transitioning between the platforms. That would refer to bad management. It's also a possibility. So let me know, which one is it? Is it a strategic investment that makes a lot of sense because of some of the points that I've mentioned here? Is it NIO being cash strapped and they do this out of necessity? Is this a well-timed or stupid-timed deal? What do the Abu Dhabis want from NIO? Do we see NIO logos on Manchester City, jersey soon? I've no idea. Anyways, interesting day today. Thanks for watching. Please make sure to like and share the video and become a patron of this channel to support us. Thanks again, and see you in my next video.